Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining with us this morning. We're going to go ahead and give it a couple of minutes just to give some stragglers to join us this morning. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's panel hosted by us, the Climate Registry. I'm Crystal Golly, the Sustainable Program Senior Manager here at the Climate Registry, and I'm excited to moderate this conversation on how universities are planning for expanded climate disclosure with a focus on Scope 3 emissions and inventory readiness. Before we begin, I'll go over some quick housekeeping. We are recording today's webinar. The webinar recording will be shared with all registrants and attendees once it is available. All attendees are on mute by default, and feel free to ask questions at any time during the webinar by typing them into the Zoom Q&A box. We will have time for Q&A after the discussion. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Climate Registry, we are a nonprofit organization helping organizations and governments decarbonize so they can be efficient and credible in a rapidly changing world. We provide cost-effective, high-integrity carbon measurement and reporting solutions to help you unlock cost savings opportunities, build trust with your key stakeholders and the higher education community, and become more resilient. As many of you know, the higher education institutions are in a unique position, not only managing complex operational footprints, but also serving as research engines, community leaders, and climate innovation hubs. Today, we'll hear from two universities that are charting thoughtful paths forward. Both institutions are members of the Climate Registry and use CRIS, our greenhouse gas emissions reporting platform, to track and manage their emissions. They'll share how tools like CRIS and cross-campus collaboration are helping them build credible climate inventories. I'd like to introduce my panelists today, Sam Lubow and Bonny Bentzin. Sam has been working in higher education sustainability for over 10 years through roles at UC Davis, UC Berkeley, and Stanford. As Associate Director of Climate Action at Stanford, she oversees climate action planning, sustainability reporting, and the implementation of various sustainability initiatives at the University of California. Her experience ranged from overseeing greenhouse gas emissions inventories to optimizing sustainable food source and waste management strategies. Bonny brings a valuable dual perspective to today's conversation as both the Deputy Chief Sustainability Officer and an advisor to a team of executive MBA students currently exploring different Scope 3 emissions methodologies. Bonny is a key member of the leadership team for sustainability. She manages sustainability across the university and works to foster partnerships among academic, research, and operational departments to create a world-class living laboratory for sustainability. Bonny began her career in higher education, sustainability as the Assistant Director of the Office of Sustainability Initiatives and the Director of University Sustainability Practices at Arizona State University, designing the overarching sustainability vision and executing the campus sustainability strategy for the university, and has also served as the Director of Sustainability for Greener U, a greater Boston area consulting firm focusing on the higher ed sector in New England. Thank you to both of you for joining me here today. So let's go ahead and get started with some of the basics. How has your university approached developing its GHG inventory to date? Sam, we could start with you.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. It's nice to be here today. Before I jump into the process, I wanted to share that we have a new website where all of our emissions inventory is public and available. And so I think we were going to pull that up really quick, but you can find this graph in our data hub at sustainable.stanford.edu. And on this graph, if you click on all scopes next to scope 3, there you go. You can see we have our verified scope 1 and 2 emissions listed in red, and we have our scope 3 emissions in gray. And we make that distinction because we have more confidence in the data that we're using for scopes 1 and 2 inventory, and we're using our best available data for our scopes 3 inventory, which I think will be helpful as we continue the conversation today.
Thanks, Sam. Bonny?
Thank you. Yes. So as you mentioned, we did have a team of MBA students work on an analysis of how we could approach Scope 3 emissions tracking for our supply chain. Before that, prior to that, we have an air travel mitigation fund that we launched many years ago prior to COVID. I've lost track of how many years, that allows us to collect a certain amount of dollars per domestic route, flight route, air route, or international route. And we chose that avenue for easier tracking. We found that in the analysis that was done, given data available, that was actually an easy, simpler and middle ground approach. Of course, we also track our emissions related to our commuting. So we have in play, and now we are starting to take a look at how we can start to dip our toe into the complex, nebulous world of Scope 3 supply chain tracking.
Thanks. We'll dive more into scope 3, but I'd like to explore how you guys approach gathering information for your greenhouse gas emissions. Do you guys use tools like TCR's CRIS platform or other similar platforms to help streamline or structure your data collection process? Sam?
Yeah, the CRIS tool has given us a really consistent way to track emissions over time, and it makes it really easy to export final reports that we can share publicly. For our scope 1 and 2 inventory, we started by working with a consultant to outline our process, and we first focused on our major systems and our utility data. And over time, we were able to expand that data collection to add things like fugitive and process emissions. We also made sure to include all university-owned and leased buildings in our reporting, so the inventory is comprehensive. And we voluntarily hire a third party to verify our scopes 1 and 2 emissions using the Climate Registry's criteria every year. And so that annual verification and the CRIS platform have been really valuable for maintaining our accuracy and credibility of our reporting.
Great. That's fantastic to hear. So let's dive into like scope 3. We know scope 3 is where things are getting complex quickly, as Bonny kind of shared with us earlier. What strategies or early steps have you taken, Bonny, to evaluate scope 3 categories and reporting readiness?
So as I mentioned, I supervise this team of students from our MBA program who spent their project time reviewing different strategies, interviewing different organizations, including Stanford, that on how they're approaching this work, and identifying what might be an initial approach for this for our Scope 3 tracking, and then a longer term strategy. And that strategy is that approach is because of the data challenges. In our campus, we have one of the largest You've got over $1 billion of spend just at UCLA alone. That does run the gamut of professional services, products like pharmaceuticals or lab equipment, office supplies, as well as utilities. And so that has been our challenge. And so in looking at these different our challenge is that the data tracking for those areas are not as clear as one would hope due to an older procurement system that's slowly being upgraded. So we have the choice of either waiting a number of years until we can start to collect more concrete data, and also wait through those contracts to those different clients or the different vendors to build into the contract this expectation, or we could start by dipping our toe with spend, which is where a lot of people start, with just a general spend by category. Now, this is challenging in some cases of spend. This is not that data there isn't currently an emissions factor, but in some cases there are. So this is we're just beginning in terms of supply chain. So what we will probably how we'll probably begin is taking our top, say even just 0.1% spend, which is vendors, which is 40% of our university spend total. And take that data and do a spend analysis based on an emission factor for the category. Longer term, we'll take a different approach, and I can talk about that a little bit later.
Thanks, Bonnie. Sam, how is Stanford, what strategies or early steps has Stanford taken to evaluate Scope 3 categories or reporting readiness?
Yeah, so in 2021, Stanford launched a Scope 3 working group that was made up of faculty, staff, and students, and it was led by a new position for our campus, the Scope 3 Emissions Program Manager. And that group was tasked with identifying what greenhouse gas protocol categories we could report to at Stanford, developing the measurement and mitigation strategies, and then planning how we would communicate our success and evaluate our success over time. And so we mostly used this working group to make sure that we understood where we could really make a difference when it comes to Scope 3 and how we could collect data in a way that showed progress and emissions reductions over time. And so that working group identified 8 of the Scope 3 categories that were relevant to higher education. For our campus, that included construction, or it's called capital goods in the greenhouse gas protocol, purchase goods and services, leases, where we have a big real estate portfolio at Stanford, business travel, student travel. We added this category of student travel to show that the impact that students make coming to and from campus when they leave for break every year. Commuting emissions, fuel and energy, and wastewater. And so the first thing we did was we started to work with departments like transportation, waste, water teams to get the operational metrics so that we could apply some publicly available emissions factors to each of those. And then we worked with business affairs for the travel records and the purchasing records. Like Bonnie said, we're highly dependent on our spend-based emissions for purchase goods and services, especially right now, and capital goods or construction. But every year we're asking ourselves, how can we make it more efficient and how could we make it more accurate? So I have a few examples of what we're doing to improve the processes now. For purchase goods and services, our procurement office is starting to lead a supplier engagement effort where they're collecting more product level emissions data when it's available from suppliers and working with those suppliers to see what they can do to reduce those emissions. And so for that category, we're using a hybrid model. When we have real emissions data available, we'll include it, and then otherwise we'll move towards a spend-based approach. And then construction, similarly, we've historically used a spend-based data and adjusted it for the Bay Area pricing, knowing that construction is generally much higher in the Bay Area. But now we have committed to any new buildings on campus need to complete a whole building life cycle assessment. And so moving forward, we're going to be able to report more real emissions for our construction categories. However, we're still struggling with how we can report real emissions or better data for our smaller projects and renovations. And so our construction category is also going to use a hybrid approach, the whole building life cycle assessment data for whole buildings, and then a spend-based data for small projects and renovations. And then finally, leases. We've historically used a square footage estimate to calculate some of our lease data. And we're actually working really closely with our real estate team and our utility providers to get real data for those properties. And so as that data becomes available, we're able to report on our real data and then only use that square footage estimate when we need to.
Wow, it sounds like there's a lot of cross-functional collaboration happening at both of these campuses. So as you guys have gained a better understanding on Scope 3 categories and reporting readiness, has there been any tools that has been beneficial to you guys in helping you gather this information moving forward, or that you wish would help you moving forward? Bonnie, do you want to start?
Sure. One of the things that is helpful on our end is that we have a robust, so for transportation, I've got a robust transportation team, and so they're handling that work through an analysis that they handle looking at our transportation modes by zip code. So they're doing that analysis and submitting it. As I mentioned, the air travel, we work with our travel office to collect that the fee for air travel mitigation on a domestic travel or international travel, and then they provide that data for us as well. Our waste piece, we're not currently using a tool. That's actually something that the university is adding for the coming year. We'll be tracking that data, and I think we're still working on that methodology. And so I guess the biggest tool I can say, honestly, is working with our different collaborators, right? So we're working with our campus experts. So rather than sort of this particular office having to be an expert in all things Scope 3, we're working with those areas to collect that data. That also, early on you asked about our carbon inventories for Scope 1 and Scope 2. I'm fortunate to have an energy services team that pulls that data together, which is important because the university is incredibly complex. So if you look at the different account holders, our hospital system, all of our clinics, over 200 clinics just in the LA area alone. And so all that data has to be aggregated from the various owners and clients. And so, for whom we sell power. So the biggest tool I can say is leaning on your collaborators on your campus.
Great. Is the same for you, Sam? You lean on your collaborators on campus?
Yeah, I echo everything that Bonnie said. And so we've been the most successful just utilizing the data sets that are available from each of the departments and then identifying best emissions factors available and applying it to those data sets. We haven't identified necessarily a tool that makes it easier, but there have been tools that have helped inform some of the emissions factors that we're using. And so that has been useful, but we're just applying it to the readily available data from the departments.
And again, we're very early on in our the supply chain journey. Sam, I'm so impressed that y'all are working on the embodied energy in your building, or the embodied emissions in your building. That's amazing. So a strategy that I think is really important. So again, a resource more than a tool is reaching out to your vendors that are already working on this on their own. They have a lot of resources that are, more resources than perhaps we have in our smaller offices. And for example, one of my favorite vendors is Thermo Fisher, and no, I do not get any sort of benefit from saying their name. I've just been really impressed with their approach that they're taking, of at least leading the way on this. They're still figuring it out as well. But by tapping into some of those leaders within your vendor pool, you can start to share ideas and build more of a collaboration in moving this forward.
Great.
And
Yes.
I'll add to that. We have some real great champions for sustainability in each of our departments. And so what we're doing with construction and capital goods wouldn't be possible if I didn't have an incredible project manager on that team that was really dedicated to pushing the whole building life cycle assessments with the team. Same with our procurement services team. We've got just incredible resources across campus that make all of this work possible too. And so I certainly couldn't do it without my partners in each of the departments. And, it's really empowering the whole campus to be more sustainable by having more champions across campus as well.
And I think, of course, we've got the argument might be said, well, Stanford's huge and they've got lots of resources, different people, around the campus and experts, and UCLA is huge and we've got different experts around the campus. But, regardless of your size of organization, look around starting somewhere to find someone with that expertise or that passion. I was connected with a staff member from an IT expert from our library system, department, and he had a personal interest in tracking and developing an understanding of the emissions from our cloud computing. That I wasn't there yet, and that's very complex. And he did significant data analysis of how many uploads we were having and how many times that upload was being accessed over the year after it was uploaded. And it was really eye-opening in an area that I just didn't have the capacity or bandwidth to get to, right? So regardless of the size of your organization, finding that some individual with a personal passion or interest or background.
So let's dive into that. How do you identify these champions across your campus, whether they're part of the university staff, other faculty members, or even students? How do you get that word out that you'd like to bring the culture of sustainability on campus?
Well, it's all about working your network and building that network and understanding what's going on and who is who in your organization. And even with that, especially at an organization the size of UCLA, I'm sure, Stanford has it all figured out, what everyone's doing. Just kidding. Is getting that word out. How, part of this is by, collecting our champions is just giving presentations wherever you can find them and talking to whoever you can talk to. We're fortunate enough to be able to include sustainability in our new employee orientation. And we don't have to talk about, decarb or scope 3 emissions, or just talking about, hey, we've got this office. This is what we do. We're a connection. Everyone's a change agent. And I then have people come and say, well, wow, I have a passion in this, or I did this work at that campus that's across the city from us. We won't say their name. Just kidding, USC. I love you. So it's really just about communicating and talking to people and getting information out there. Sam, what would you say?
My first response was a lot of them are self-identified. So I have a lot of folks around campus that are really passionate and dedicated to reducing their emissions, and they see the impact of the work that they're doing, and they reach out to the Office of Sustainability to see what they can do in their own work. And so, like Bonnie said, the networking is huge. I am currently leading our campus's climate action plan, and as part of that planning effort, we have working groups for different subject matters across campus. And what we did was we identified through leadership who can help us to develop the content for each of the content categories. And so that really helped to identify champions and then made sure that it was built within their goals and responsibilities so that I could work directly with them. And so our content lead for construction is the project manager I mentioned that has been really dedicated to helping us to implement the whole building life cycle assessment requirement. And the content lead on waste is now getting a much better understanding of what it means to reduce emissions and waste. And so I think that climate action planning strategy has been really crucial as well to identify the champions and find folks that can help.
Great.
Now, I'm curious, in my students project, they interviewed Harvard, and they found that Harvard's using EcoVadis for a lot of the data they're doing related to supplier, and that's particularly helpful with organizations like Steelcase or whatnot. Are you utilizing EcoVadis at all?
We've explored it. If I have a chance, I'll pull up the tool that our procurement team is using, but we have explored EcoVadis. And I know that the Q&A is asking for some of the tools I think that we've mentioned. When we're looking for a new emissions factor, the first thing we'll do is kind of ask the industry. And so I hesitate giving the exact tools that we're using now, but we've used SIVO for procurement services. We've used the EPA emissions factor hub for waste. I think, it's really just finding the best available emissions factor and then double checking with your network and the industry to make sure that that's the emission factor that other folks have been using as well.
Yeah, and here at the Climate Registry, we annually put together an emission factor document that is imported into our CRIS platform to help streamline the greenhouse gas emissions reporting process for organizations like Stanford and UCLA. We are also looking into building out our Scope 3 emission factor data set to be made available to members also. So that is something that we are also working on because we are seeing the need to have these Scope 3 emission factors readily available to members to easily calculate Scope 3 emissions instead of searching the internet, searching through colleagues to find that. I think TCR has made a great impact of being the one source of emission factors in the past for Scope 1 and Scope 2 and biogenic emissions. And I think we could do the same for Scope 3 moving forward also.
I think that's really important, especially given that some of that data is on government websites that may, change data over time, just as philosophies are shifting. So it's very important to have sort of that historical data in place. I'll also say that because of the shifting methodology, because of these, all these different data emissions factors, I think it's very important to make sure that whenever you're discussing Scope 3 emissions, reporting anything is fully disclosing your methodology so that we can better understand who's using what as we all work our way toward, this, finalizing or solidifying this work.
I agree.
I'll add, we asked our verifier what it looks like to get our Scope 3 emissions verified as well. And they told us that they're hearing that question more and more. And so I think in the future, it'll be easier to have our emissions verified, not just for Scopes 1 and 2, but for Scopes 3 too. And that methodology is going to be critical that we share more transparently then too.
Yes, and TCR is also looking into developing a guidance document on Scope 3 methodology as we release those Scope 3 category emission factors. So that way the transparency factor and everyone understands how to report certain Scope 3.
I also do want to do a shout out because you asked about tools in the past, and this is not one that we're using specifically, but other campuses I believe are. And so SciMap, which is out of the UNH, they're moving in heavily on the Scope 3 and trying to build out some reporting tools and structures. So I do want to just mention that, even though it's not something that we're using, that work is really advancing and they're doing a great job at UNH. So I do want to just do that shout out.
Some great tools being shared here. So you both report to the AASHE STARS program. How has reporting your greenhouse gas inventory in TCR helped your university strengthen its STAR reporting or improve its emissions transparency? Whoever wants to go first.
Well, we as a UC system, it's, STARS, AASHE STARS is every 3-year submission for us, but we do an annual report that we submit and public on a website. I had it pulled up for a second if we want to pull it up, but we're we've been reporting these emissions for, oh man, I think we've got 15 annual reports up here. So we've got that piece where we're just publicly reporting annually. AASHE STARS and any of these tools we're reporting help to keep the transparency, and that's important. Transparency is how not only we build that public trust that we're actually having an impact or raise the questions of how we can do better. But it also is how we all move ourselves up the learning curve. If we're all just sort of climbing our own way up, then that's going to take a very long time for us to actually build viable systems. And so we've got to be able to leapfrog over each other. I've always thought that the best strategy is to make sure you put everything up in front, because somehow the solution will come to you. Either the senior leadership will prioritize it for making some advancements, or your alumni will reach out with questions and comments, or a vendor might find a solution, or someone will come up will help you advance this work. And so that transparency, whether it's through AASHE STARS on your own website. You know, that's very important.
Sam?
I agree. I think the CRIS tool and just reporting to TCR has been really helpful when we get not just AASHE STARS to ask about our emissions, but any of the multiple platforms that we do our reporting to. And so it's made us sure that we have that information readily available when a new reporting platform comes available or when our AASHE STARS report is due.
Nice. And then to leave time for Q&A at the end, I know we've shared a lot of advice throughout this conversation, but do you have any advice for other universities who are on this call who are just getting started on building a comprehensive greenhouse gas emissions inventory, or preparing for Scope 3? Do you have any advice on how they can get started? Sam, do you want to start first?
Yeah, I encourage you to just get started. I mean, you can refine and improve the process over time, but don't let perfection stop the progress. And so just starting to build those relationships across campus and understanding what data collection is available is going to make the analysis a lot smoother. I do want to emphasize that there needs to be dedicated staff time for this. And so I don't recommend that it's just a side project. I really think that within your Office of Sustainability or within campus, trying to find the resources that can really put effort into the emissions analysis is also important. And then the last piece of advice I have is don't forget why we're doing this. We need to be reducing our emissions. And so it's more than just counting emissions. And that's the end of the day. I mean, we really need to understand how we can reduce those emissions. And so again, you know, don't try to make your emissions data so perfect that it's preventing you from doing the real progress, which is focusing on programs that would actually reduce those emissions.
Bonnie,
So
do you
I
have
agree
any
with,
advice?
absolutely. I agree with everything that Sam has shared. But I'd add a couple of additional items. And one of them is that, you know, make your methodology absolutely public, and in your tracking that you're doing behind the scenes, make take careful notes of where the data came from, how it was come about. Understand it's going to be incorrect, especially in these areas, because it's always a level of inaccuracy in everything, because just and you know, bookkeeping errors, if you will, right? Spreadsheet errors that come up. And so it's really important to just keep, you know, embrace that and understand, don't get lost in those weeds. Understand that, you know, there's certain things like Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions that are much more accurate, right? Have a very small level of inaccuracy, but then you get into the Scope 3, and depending on the category, you know, different levels of, you know, not quite, you know, accurate because of the data availability. But start somewhere, but also publicly map out where you want to go. So in the case of supply chain, again, this is a long journey to get the data where you want it. There's different emissions factors available for different categories of data. You know, the spend data is an important place to start, but it's not completely comprehensive, of course, because it doesn't take into account all the different items or the types of items that you might be purchasing. But starting there, making it clear, and understanding that your vendors, these are long contracts. So that's the importance of that publicly, you know, disclosing where you want to be in the long term, so that as contracts start to evolve, or as that vendor might have a personal interest or an organizational interest in advancing this work, they might be able to start it without you, and be able to, you know, come in strong when you make that a priority. So publicly disclosing, setting a timeline, supply chain, starting somewhere. And the final thing is, in your data collection, respect your own organizational timeline. If I were to try to collect all my data that I need for Scope 3 at this point when we're doing year-end reporting, I wouldn't get anywhere. So when you're laying out your project, be respectful of your organization's timeline and where that data is coming from and what their challenges might be.
On average, how long does it take you guys to start to finish, even if that includes verification? How long does it take for your institutions to kind of gather the data and put together your inventories and then have it go through verification?
It takes months. And so we get our, the data starts coming in January at that calendar year closed. We really try to have a really good estimate of all of our emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3 in April. And then we start the verification process for our scopes 1 and 2, which doesn't complete until August. And so the whole process takes about 8 months to have full transparency from it. But we are working towards, and this was actually the first time we succeeded in it this year, having all of our emissions from the previous calendar year, scopes 1, 2, and 3, a really good estimate by April.
That's pretty impressive. Bonnie, do you know how long it takes for UCLA to kind of put together their greenhouse gas emissions inventory?
So again, I'm fortunate to have another team working on that, but I would guess, given that we're of similar scales, that it's pretty similar to Stanford. I will say that one of the other aspects of reporting that we do is in year-end reporting for the annual report. And I'm actually just trying to pull it up now. I had it up a second ago and I've somehow clicked over it. I'll look for that in a second and pull that up. But oh, there we go. If I could share real quick, I'll do that. So again, this is the system-wide data. So for all of the campuses, you can click into specific data related to locations. And we actually are just entered this data collections phase, and we have a series of very tight deadlines that we have to come in to get this data loaded into this a spreadsheet that we use on the back end for all the systems, because for all the campuses, because then it has to be cleaned and formatted, and they're all trying to make this ready to launch, in the spring of the next year, so that they can then report that to our Board of Regents. And so this is, on a public website. You can actually go through and see. Let me go back on this real quick. So here's our that's the 2024. Oh, I had it. Anyhow, you can find all the past years as well, and actually go in by location as well. So this takes us, it's a pretty fast track to get this reported by the August 1st, and then refinement so until September 1st. And of course, the challenge being that we're doing this all with year-end reporting for the other departments. So we have to be very, very kind in our data requests that we have for them.
That's a lot to take in and on as you work with your campus timelines. You guys shared some really great resources to find relevant emission factors for scope 3. Can you share some of them again?
Yeah, we've used CIVO for our purchased goods and services, the EPA Waste Emissions Factors Hub for waste. We're using the Climate Registry for anything that has a utility, like scopes 1 and 2, and process and fugitive, also the Climate Registry, and then our leases data and our fuel and energy data. We're also using the emissions factors from the Climate Registry. I think that's we use available emissions factors from our suppliers as well for things like business air travel, and then when it's available for purchased goods and services.
This might be out of your realm, but we received a question on what software do you use to display the data into your website? If you guys know.
Yeah, we partnered with a vendor, and they developed the website for us, and so, or with us. And so we, I'm not sure which web platform they're using, but I'm happy to share more if they want to reach out, and I can connect you to our communications team.
Yeah, for the site that I just shared, that's all Sarah Lisker at our central UC sustainability office in the president's office, and Sapna Thurtukil. I think I got her last name right. She was prior to Sarah and did that work as well. So they both, Sapna was able to bring that out of a PDF form into a more dynamic online website, which is really helpful. And then Sarah's just done a great job of helping us refine our data. So that send Sarah Lisker an email if you're interested in how we're handling that online report, because thankfully I can stay out of it.
I think that hones in on the point that it's great to have a great team working with you to collaborate with, to produce great visualizations like this of very technical data, and even working with vendors who can assist with various things like this.
But again, one thing I will say though is for, again, a smaller school or an organization that may not have those resources at this point in time, because we're all facing some challenges now, is, some of the tools from just Tableau or Canva are amazingly helpful and useful for more of a layperson. So I would say, don't get wrapped up. It has to be super flashy, and, just you got to convey the information in whatever tool that you could get your hands on.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just launched our website in April, but prior to that, we were using Tableau. And I keep wondering what great software is going to be available for us soon. But we're using Excel spreadsheets for a lot of the data collection now too. And so Excel continues to be the tool of choice for a lot of this data analysis.
Yeah, for the back end date annual report data that we're submitting, we moved off of spreadsheets, and this year we're moving back on because it just was so much easier, not only for loading the data for that current year, but being able to cross-reference from the previous year, so you can understand if you can do that quick check before you load of, am I off? How far, if you see a dramatic decrease and you know that you haven't had that work, you've missed something. And so it's a helpful back check.
Yeah, I was going to say Excel is a very powerful tool. As a member of TCR, members have access to a dashboard that produces visualizations that can be snapshotted and an image placed on a website. So we try and make that readily available for all of our members as part of the membership benefits package. Um, uh, any last thoughts that either one of you want to share?
Just dip your toe in there and share what you're finding. When in anything that we're doing, with tools that we create at UCLA, my philosophy is always, I'll share it, but if you make it better, I want it back. If you start to sell it, I'm coming after you. So it's like we've got to share each other's lessons learned and methodologies and information, so we can just launch up that learning curve and not just creep up that learning curve.
Yeah. And, I shared that we started our scope 3 process back in 2021, but it feels like we're just getting started too. And so there's so much going on in this space. And so, keep your eyes and ears open for what the industry is doing and some of the tools and resources, because I can only imagine it's getting better from here.
I didn't realize you started in 2021, right at COVID. Was that deliberate? Like, okay, we can work on this, or you just wanted to have crazy data?
I was at Berkeley at the time that the working group had started, but my understanding is it was scope 3 was a category and a topic that couldn't be ignored at that point. And so as we were starting to understand what our next steps for climate action was, we had some leadership at our campus that decided to put some resources towards our scope 3 program.
Well, and I think that, that's another piece is given what we've seen with data through COVID, through, massive changes with energy, fuel mixtures and things. And, just as we start to work our way through refining this methodology, I cannot stress enough of keeping your raw data sets for each year in a very accessible place, that if you leave, someone else can tap into it and be able to rebuild if they have to rejigger this, the trend based on a new methodology. So that's really important, because trying to
Absolutely.
backtrack into that is challenging.
Yeah, we spend
Yeah,
a lot of time on our process manuals too. And so I completely agree with that. Because if you do need somebody to jump in and take over what somebody else had started, then those process manuals are critical.
I echo that. I advise all of our members to import as much supporting documentation into our CRIS platform. You don't have to make all of your documents publicly available if you decide to go through verification, but those documents do help your next person in line kind of understand and follow your trail as to what you were doing and thinking when you were reporting those particular greenhouse gas emissions. Plus, it keeps all of your inventory documents together in a nice centralized location also.
And warning, as we've learned this the hard way, if you're using Google Drive for any of this, change ownership. This is the challenge we had with our students that worked on great projects in the past, and then they didn't change ownership before they left, and we're having to backtrack. And this is those lessons learned in our sort of, web of IT tools and resources and hubs that we use. So that's something that seems simple, but man, we've regretted this over and over and over again for not making sure this happens carefully.
I agree. Well, thank you both for joining us today and sharing your insights and experiences. I think they were very valuable. For those interested in learning more about CRIS or the Climate Registry's tools for higher education institutions, we'll follow up with a link to today's recording and additional resources in a webinar recap email. Thanks again, and we hope to connect with as many of you as soon as possible. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.